Always gotta keep my head up, always gotta keep my eyes up. Smoking dope, got my eyes low. Off the drugs, kill my idols. Everybody got me fed up. Reminisce when shit was better, but was it really ever better? Or did I feel like this forever?
Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. My name is Gabby if you don't already know me, and I love to talk all things personal finance and lifestyle and what else? Organization. If I feel a little bit awkward at the beginning of this video, it's because my boyfriend refuses to leave the apartment. So I am filming with him sitting right there, and it is a little bit awkward for me, I'm not gonna lie. So, hello. Welcome back. I'm excited to do a sit down video. It feels like it's been a while, even though it hasn't really. I will be doing a financial journey video today. And this one is a bit of a tricky one. I was kind of making like an outline for what I wanted to touch on, and there's a lot to cover. So I don't want to bore you guys too much with the details, but there are some critical parts I think that got me to where I am today. So I guess we dive in. I will do one announcement. In my April reset video, there was an update to the budget tracker at the very end where I talked about how you can add the updates that I made to the annual tracker to your spreadsheet. I just want to make it known, I have added an update to that video, but I do want to make it known just in case for some reason someone hasn't gone back to that video, that if you needed to update your annual tracker by copying and pasting it into your own personal copy of your spreadsheet, you need to do the same thing with the investment tracker and the debt tracker. There are links between the annual tracker and those sheets, and for some reason, even though the name is the same, even though when you copy and paste your tracker, you're going to rename it to annual tracker, even though you did that, it's still for some reason not updating the formulas. So if you copy those over with that annual tracker, everything should work out fine and you shouldn't have any errors. Just an update if you guys missed it. I think we can dive right in. I have my decaf coffee and I am feeling slightly less awkward. I can just see his little head. So let's start off. I do want to just put a little bit of a disclaimer at the beginning. So I talked about this in my investing portfolio video, but I do have a lot of privilege. I came from a very healthy financial background. My parents did very well for me. They provided for me more than that. I am very privileged in that respect. I do want to just cover some of the things that I have had the privilege of not having to deal with, and that way it's all out in the open. Yeah, I basically grew up in a middle class family. You know, we were doing pretty well. I never remember any issues around money. There was never moments in time where we had to worry about money or we didn't have enough. But I will say that it was always very apparent that we lived within our means. My dad was the sole income earner, so my mom was a stay-at-home mom after having us, and we were on one income. So I think for the first, decade of my life, it was apparent we were on one income. I shared a bedroom with my brother until I was probably like 12. We lived in a 2-bedroom house that my parents bought when I was born. And then we always had used cars. I remember my dad driving this car he called Betsy for a really long time that had like rust in the side. And then slowly over time, it was apparent that we were getting wealthier and wealthier. And I mentioned this in my other video, but my dad worked in oil and gas in Calgary, Alberta, which is like Canada's hub for oil, and he did very well for himself there. So there was definitely an oil boom. We were all of a sudden very wealthy, and we moved into a very large 5-bedroom house with a 5-car garage, that kind of thing. It was always known that my parents were going to be able to send me to university fully funded. I wasn't gonna have to take out student loans, so I obviously have that privilege before me. I've also been gifted my cars. I've never had any car debt. I've never paid a lease on a car, and so that has really helped me out with not having debt that I'm constantly paying. So yeah, I just want to say that I am extremely grateful for the position that I have been put in. My parents did a very good job of setting me up where I did not have to worry about debt in my 20s. I was able to start saving and investing right away, and I hope that I can pay it forward for my own kids. I will do everything in my power to pay it forward for my own kids because it really gave me a leg up, and I understand that leg up that I have. So I don't want you to beat yourself up if you are in a completely different financial situation and you're comparing yourself to me. This is not for comparisons. This is more so just how I struggled with consumer debt and how I fixed that problem. Let's dive in to chapter 1. I've created chapters. Chapter 1 is my childhood, and I think that this is an important part that everybody should reflect on, is how money was discussed and looked at in your family growing up, because it has a very strong impact on how you look at it now. Psychology, baby. It's just the way it is. So when I think back to my childhood, I think of security. I don't think of scarcity or fear around money. I also don't think that it ever felt like I was missing out on anything because we didn't have anything like that. So I do feel a secure feeling around money. And I do have strong memories of knowing my dad was frugal and very thoughtful with money. He would always point out how lots of people live on credit cards, how lots of people have the perception that they're well off, but they aren't, that behind the curtain, behind the veil, there is debt and everything is month to month and there's payments for everything. And I grew up knowing that my dad bought every single car we had in cash outright. We owned our home. My dad was not a fan of renting or leasing anything. He didn't want to owe money to anyone. And so that was a strong opinion that I also learned as a kid. Another factor is I also was around my mom, who has a little bit more of a complex relationship with money. She is definitely a emotional spender, I would say. She spends to feel better. I was around her the most. Obviously, she was a stay-at-home parent, so I was around her perspective on money majority of the time, and I definitely saw the let's worry about it later mentality around spending, putting money on cards, and not knowing how the total racked up. The few fights my parents had around money, I remember it revolving around my mother's credit card balance and how she wasn't sure how it got there, and this consistent feeling of her spending being a little out of control. Nothing that we couldn't pay off, nothing that was a threat to our lifestyle, but just more so this continuous spending to feel better and not having a control on it, not having any sort of restrictions around it. So I think that will be important later. I did not ever have a job in high school. So this is another thing, is I didn't really have an income that I earned myself until university. I'm very grateful. My parents were more focused on me enjoying my childhood, enjoying the last few years of my life before I had a career for the rest of my life until I retired. And I am grateful for that time I had just to enjoy being a kid. So yeah, my first really experience having a job was after my first semester of university. And my teens were spent, not having to worry about that, which I'm very grateful for. Chapter 2, so my first taste of independence. So I went to university at 17. As I mentioned, my parents fully funded my schooling, my tuition and everything was covered. And then when I didn't have enough money from my co-ops are semesters I worked in between my schooling. I was in engineering and we had many co-ops that we had to work and we were paid for them. It's an amazing thing here in Canada. You're not an intern ever. You are paid for every job you work. I actually had high paying jobs during my co-op, so I would have a lot of income coming in during that period I would work, and then I would try to save as much of it as I could for my next semesters, and then once that money ran dry, my parents would supplement me again with more money. I felt pretty stable. I felt like there was always a backup plan, and that kind of was a great thing. I have a very secure feeling around money. I don't have a lot of anxiety tied to money, but it also sort of implemented this like a backup plan kind of feeling. So I got my first credit card around 18. I did it for the credit, and I was actually pretty good with my credit card for a while. I think it was a couple years into university, maybe my second or third year, where I started to really struggle. School was really hard for me. It was almost traumatic. My mom got really sick for a while. I had a lot of family stuff going on. I also was in a toxic relationship, and I did not know how to cope. I had no coping mechanisms at all in place, and I definitely started to spend to feel better. And reminder here, notice the pattern. And so that started in university for me for sure. I remember sitting in the library with a good friend of mine, and we would shop almost constantly. Me and her are still really great friends and we always laugh about how much we shopped in university. But yeah, that was definitely a way that I chose to feel better. I would also go to the bars every weekend and spend a lot of money at the bars as well. So that was another coping mechanism that was definitely not the healthiest. I got very used to making sure I had enough money to cover my bills, to cover my rent, but not having anything left over. So I was spending every single dollar I had, and I was constantly trying to make sure I could cover my credit card bills. And there were definitely months where I would carry a balance. I would pay the minimums. No, I never paid the minimums. The minimums here in Canada are really low. It's like $10. I would never just pay the minimums, but I would throw as much as I could onto the cards and then roll over that balance to the next month, and then tell myself I was gonna be better the next month, and not really being able to pull through on that. I started to carry larger and larger balances through university, and by the time I graduated, I had planned a bunch of trips. I was traveling for 6 weeks in Australia, and then I went to Europe as well, like 2 weeks later. So after my last semester of school, after I had put all that travel on my cards, I probably had about $4,000 rolling over on my credit cards, and I had no job at this point. So I was continuously rolling over balances on my credit cards, and I told myself that as soon as I got a job, I'd pay them off and then I would start fresh. Chapter 3 is starting my career. After this summer of travel and expenses, I moved to Vancouver. I transferred my vehicle over to, I'm from Alberta, so I transferred my vehicle over to BC. I got all my bills, and my fixed costs went up dramatically at this point. So I was used to paying about $520 for rent, and my rent went up to $800, and I also had a lot more fixed costs. And I also, at this time, it was like the Black Friday season, it was Christmas, I had a job, I was excited about having an income. I got a little too excited, I bought way too much stuff during this time frame, and I came out of that season with a lot of money sitting on my cards. I would say probably about like $5,000 sitting on my credit cards. And I started to feel concerned. I started to realize that this whole paycheck to paycheck thing wasn't very cute, especially if I continued the way I was. And I wanted to figure out how I could avoid it, how I could change it, what I could do to start saving and investing money for the future. So I got really interested in a lot of financial YouTubers at this time. So I started watching like Graham Stephan, and The Financial Diet was a big one for me. I think a little bit of Ramit Sethi at this time. I know it was more so his book. I don't think he was as big of an online YouTube figure at this time, but I definitely started to hear about automatic investments and automatic savings. And I committed at this time, this is probably like the beginning of 2019, I committed to an automatic investment and an automatic saving coming out of my account every single time I got paid. I think when I first started, it was $75 in... Sir? When I first started, it was $75 into my retirement account and then $50 into my TFSA. Yeah, and that's where I started. And I remember thinking like, I won't even miss this money. That's, a good place to start. And it was an amazing thing that I started for myself. And then every single time I got a raise, which was basically biannually, I would take that difference, whatever amount different that raise was, and I would add that to my investments and my savings. So this is when I really started to get more curious about finances, get more curious about how to save, how to invest, and everyone was talking about how you needed to budget. So in the past, I had considered around how much money I should be spending every week. I think that's what I usually would do, is try to find a number that I should stay below in the week, and then that way I could kind of mentally keep track of it. But this time is when I started to actually track things in an Excel spreadsheet. And I think I will insert an image of my first budget tracker I ever made right here. It's actually so funny to look at now. It's like a random color-coded, just chaotic system that makes no sense at all. But I definitely found at first budgeting by week was a lot easier. I would break down my salary I would just divide it by 2, and then that was the amount of money I had to spend for 1 week. And then I would just deduct my rent divided by the number of weeks. And it was kind of chaotic, I'm not gonna lie. This is kind of where I started to be more aware of my money, being more aware of how to save and invest for the future. But I also did not have great control over my spending. And I also didn't have the best salary out of university. I was making about $10,000 more at my co-ops as a student than I was when I first got my job. The income was definitely an issue. I was used to a certain level of spending. I had climatized to spending everything I had at like a certain salary, and then when my income started and I started contributing to savings and investments, I found that it was really hard for me to lower my spending from where I was at. I was used to a certain lifestyle. And I think that is a big thing that I want everyone to be very mindful of. It's a lot easier to start spending more than it is to go back to how you were spending in the past. And I would highly advise anyone who has regular raises or who is somebody who can continuously expect more and more money as time goes on, try to be very mindful of lifestyle inflation. This is something that I was very aware of from the jump. And that is why every single time I got a raise, I would take that raise and I would put it into my investments and my savings. And that way I wouldn't look at my account and see more money and feel like I could spend more money. Chapter 4, credit card debt. So as I mentioned, although I was tracking my spending and I was getting more curious about finances, I still couldn't get a hold on my spending. I would look at the interest and say, oh, it was $40, it was $50, no big deal. It's like one dinner. I spent money on one dinner that I didn't actually get. Who cares? That's not that big of a deal. And I really just didn't think that having a credit card balance was that big of a deal. It was a couple $1,000s, not a huge issue. I really struggled to pay my credit down. So at this point, I was trying to build an emergency fund. That was my predominant goal, and also invest and save at the same time. So I would get to a good amount of money in my emergency fund, and then I would be like, oh, whoa, like my credit card balance is a little bit too high, and I would have to throw a big chunk of change onto my cards, and then it would kind of just continue the cycle. I would pay off the cards down to, like $2,000, and then slowly over time, they would build again, and then I'd do the same thing, pay off the balance, take some money out of my emergency fund. And it just kind of felt like this continuous cycle where I felt out of control. I didn't feel like I had any say in it. It just felt like no matter what, my cards were gonna get back up to about $5,000. And I really think that this is like something I saw at home as a kid. Like I really remember vivid memories of my mom having the same sort of feeling. Like, I don't know why it's back there. I don't know how that happened. It didn't really feel like I bought anything. I have nothing to show for this huge credit card balance. And I just really felt that way as well. Like even though I was tracking the amount of money I was spending, I wasn't necessarily spending within my means. I was spending more, and I just wanted to live and enjoy life and go on trips and pay for concerts and, buy clothes and makeup all the time. And I just didn't understand why my sums on my credit cards were so high. Yeah, and I really felt kind of stuck in the cycle at this point. I didn't really know how to break it, and I would get scared to put money from my savings on my cards because I felt like I just took all this money out of my emergency fund and I have to build it back up again. And then on top of that, my credit card would just go back to exactly where it was beforehand. So this definitely lent to me really struggling with saving up an emergency fund in this time frame. Okay. Chapter number 5, COVID. So COVID actually had a huge impact on my finances in many ways. First and foremost, as I mentioned in my investing profile video, I have an inheritance from when my grandma passed away extremely young. I have an inheritance that was invested when I was probably about 12 or 13 years old. So at this time, it's been many years in the market. It should have been growing, and a lot of it was invested in oil and gas, which obviously wasn't doing that well post, 2010s. And then on top of that, COVID happened. And I remember logging in to my investments, and this money that was supposed to be for a house down payment was extremely down, like so down that I was like shocked. I was beside myself. That was my first sort of feeling of, okay, investing in only stocks might be gambling. Like it could very well be gambling. it felt like, oh shit, I need to educate myself on what's going on in these accounts, and I need to understand what's happening so that I can protect myself from situations like this. There was a lot of panic in the world at this time, and then that just like added a whole other layer of it. So that was the first way COVID impacted my finances, as I really started to look at the investments that I had, my inheritance was in, and really start to like consider how I should take a hold of these things and actually play a more critical role in that money. And then two, I also had a very close family member of mine get into finance at this point. They started a career in finance around this time. So I started to have more conversations around finances, not just personal finance, but how to build wealth with investing, how to build wealth in the markets. I started educating myself a little bit more on the lingo, the verbiage, the way that things were discussed in this field. The third way that COVID impacted my finances is obviously we were not doing anything, we were staying home, and so I saw a lot of savings at this time. I remember being able to pay my credit cards off in full for the first time in a very, very long time, and actually have extra money left over after everything to put into savings. And I also, as a hobby, got a side hustle during this time. So I started delivering groceries for Instacart during COVID. It was honestly at first just a way to get out of the house. I've always loved grocery shopping. I think it's fun. And it was an excuse to get out of the house and to go see people. I was feeling really cooped up. I just needed it. I needed to get out. I needed something to do. And it was like, cool, I get to make some money, fun, whatever. And I really started to see the difference that a couple of $100 every week made for me. And this is when I really started to feel the feeling of, okay, so why is a couple $100 that big of a difference for me? I don't think it's because I'm sitting at this amount of money that I'm making that I can't live within my means. I started to realize that I just get accustomed to a certain lifestyle, and then once I have to spend less than that, it is almost impossible for me to do. So adding a couple of $100 extra just really gives me the flexibility to make mistakes, but then still have extra money to cover everything. So it was at this time that I really started to consider, like, a side hustle is a great way to make a huge financial impact. One, I had less time to be spending money, and two, a couple $100. I think we think that that's not that big of a deal, but it actually makes a bigger difference than you think. It was a great way for me to have guilt-free spending money on things. Like, you know, if I made $150 this week from Instacart, I can kind of spend that guilt-free, and it's like it never happened. This was also a time where I just started to get really obsessed with finances. I started to get obsessed with stocks and making money, and I definitely made a lot of mistakes in this time frame. If you watch my investment portfolio video, I talked a lot about all these random stocks I bought into during this time, and I learned a lot of lessons during this time. This was a very impactful time for finances for me. Chapter 6, around 2022, let's say, I really started to think about how I wanted more than what I was giving myself. I was investing, I was saving, I was being very conscious of money, I was budgeting weekly, but I was still carrying a credit card balance and I was still paying interest to my financial institutions. So I started to hear more and more, you will never get the returns in the market that a credit card is, because credit cards are sitting at 20-something% interest. And that really started to hit home for me. I really started to understand what that meant. And you look at things like a 10% return in the stock market over a 10-year period is a great return. That is an excellent return. And yet we are paying 20-something% interest every month on our credit cards. And that $40 that I thought was no big deal actually is a big deal, because it takes a lot more money invested to get that same return. I don't want to pay a financial company money that I don't need to. I don't want to put myself through that any longer. I am done with the rolling credit cards. So I think what I did is I did take money out of my sinking funds. So something else I didn't mention was around when I first started investing with my automatic investments, I also set up automatic savings for emergency fund first and foremost. And then when that was like 5,000 or 6,000, I started making sinking funds. And predominantly at first it was for my car insurance. My car insurance was very expensive when I first moved to Vancouver. It was like over $4,000 annually. So I definitely had to save that. And so I had a sinking fund for that. And then I also had a sinking fund for Christmas because that was a soft spot for me. I always spend a ton of money around Christmas. Sinking funds were set up around that time, and emergency fund was also started around that time. By 2022, I've had my career for about 4 years, and I was ready to just take a big sum of money out of my emergency fund, my sinking funds, and pay off my credit card balance in full, just clean slate it for myself, $0. And then from there, I just committed to being really diligent with my budget. If I overspent, that money was immediately coming out of my savings. And if I obviously spent within my means, then good for me. And I think this really started to have a positive impact. It took me so long to make those savings that every single time I had to pull from my savings to pay off my card, it really started to like make me feel like, okay, I need to fix this. I need to be better. I need to check in with myself. It was around this time that I started to make my first like a little bit more advanced budget spreadsheets. I can actually show you a couple photos of how they've evolved over time. Slowly over time, I started wanting more and more for my budget spreadsheets. I found that really fun and really exciting to budget every month. I always look forward to budgeting. Yeah, I really started getting obsessed with my budget spreadsheet and just seeing how different metrics can really motivate me to be better with my finances and to stay on the path that I've chosen to not pay any interest and to not have any debt. After using a couple of spreadsheets I bought on Etsy, I definitely felt that they were all a little bit off for me just because I am a credit card user. I like using credit cards for points, and since I got my credit card-ish under control, I felt like I was responsibly using credit cards, but it felt like no budget tracker out there really was built for that. Most of them treat credit cards like debt, whereas I treat mine more like a cash account. So I really wanted to make a spreadsheet myself that I would use myself. And in September of 2023, I started to create my budget spreadsheet, and that went live in January. And then in November of 2023, I started my YouTube channel, and that was to primarily make a video for my Etsy, my spreadsheet. I was like, okay, I'm gonna make a video for this and let me just see if I can figure out editing, if I can figure out filming. And I've always kind of had this dream of starting a YouTube channel ever since I was really young. At first it was to do beauty YouTube and stuff like that. But so finally I started one in November of last year, and that kind of takes us to today. All right, so chapter 8, the current landscape. I would say that I feel more secure with money than I ever have in my entire life. I feel like I have a handle on it. I, for a long time, felt really guilty about spending money on myself, spending money on things that I enjoy. I just felt guilty about it. I felt like it was ridiculous that I was wasting my money, things like that. And so I really felt empowered, breaking down my income into certain percentages that I know are going to get me in a good place for retirement. I don't have to worry if I'm saving enough. I don't have to worry if I'm investing enough. I know I am. Every time I get a raise, I still take that difference and add it to my investments. And then I can kind of spend the rest of my money guilt-free for me. I feel guilt-free most of the time spending money out. I definitely, if you watch my budgets, my budgeting videos, I definitely have months where I'm like, ooh, I should probably turn it down a little bit next month, but I feel like I actually am able to do that. If I say, hey, I'm not gonna spend money on this next month, then I usually can. I'm very, very proud of the amount that I have saved and invested. I am kind of shocked at how much I've done in this time frame, and I'm very, very proud of it. So yeah, I hit a huge milestone last year, 2023. I saved and invested over $100,000 of my own money, and that was a big goal of mine for a long time because many financial advisors or anybody in the space will tell you that that first 100,000 is the hardest. It's the worst milestone. It's the one that's going to feel the most grueling, the most taxing. It's going to feel like it's barely moving, and after you hit that milestone, it just is so much easier. Your money is compounding so much faster, and usually you're also at a better place in your career where you have more income to put more money into investments and savings. And that's definitely been true for me. I feel like I'm almost halfway to another 100,000, which is kind of crazy to say. And it's just been so much easier, so much smoother, and I'm very proud of the growth that I have been able to do. So yeah, that money is my own money. I track it separately. I've always wanted to track it separately from the inheritance that I have. I also have a very healthy emergency fund that I feel good about. People say like $1,000 emergency fund, and I'm like, no, absolutely not. I feel a lot more comfortable having about 6 months of full expenses. So that would be like the amount that I spend on my budget trackers, including savings and investments. If I lost my job tomorrow, I would not want to stop saving and investing. So my emergency fund has enough money for me to save and invest, which is a weird thing to think about. I think that's just a number that I'm comfortable with. And I also have very large sinking funds. I've been contributing to those for years, 5 years. So do not beat yourself up if it's hard to save for both an emergency fund and sinking funds. This is something I have done for a long time now, and it pays off. You get to a point where it's not that much effort to re-establish or replenish your sinking funds or your emergency fund if you ever need to tap into it. It's the building it the first time that is really tough. I just want everyone to, persevere on your saving and investing journey. So yeah, that is basically my journey up to today. I am currently 29 years old, and I feel better about money today than I ever have in my entire life. And my goals for the future are, one, I'm concerned about having kids, not so much like kids being expensive, but like the way that you're just not paid when you have a kid here in Canada, or at least like in my job, I think I would get like $500 a paycheck every 2 weeks. So that concerns me. And then on top of that, not knowing if I want to be more present in my kids' lives and not be able to work. It's something that it concerns me. It's something that maybe men don't have to think about at all, but as a woman, it does concern me. Like, how am I going to sustain these investing and saving goals that I have for myself during that time? And then two, I also am on track to hopefully retire a bit early. I want to retire around when my dad did. He retired at 55, and I think that is a great age. Not necessarily retire, I just don't want to be tied down to a specific job. I want to be able to choose what I want to do. If that's pouring beers at the local brewery, then that's what I want to do. I just want freedom. I want financial freedom. And that is my main driver right now for saving and investing. I want to buy a house, but I don't really think I want to own a bunch of property. That's not like a goal I see for myself. I more so want to have money in the market that I can use to live off of when I am elderly. And I want to be very comfortable in my adult years. I want to spend freely and not have to think about money very much. So those are my goals. And yeah, I hope this was interesting and fun and inspired you guys to perhaps take a look at your finances and turn things around. It's never too late, but I also am very aware of how privileged my situation was. I did not have to worry about student loans or, paying for a car at all in my 20s. I was able to right away just start investing and saving. So that is something I'm very, very aware of and very grateful for. And I want that for everyone. I really wish we all could have that. Thank you for joining me today. I had lots of fun talking about this one. If you have any recommendations for future financial related videos, I would love to hear it. And I will see you guys in the next one. Bye.
Always gotta keep my head up, always gotta keep my eyes up. Smoking dope, got my eyes low. Off the drugs, kill my idols. Everybody got me fed up. Reminisce when shit was better, but was it really ever better? Or did I feel like this forever? Always gotta keep my head up.